Hello, and welcome back to the 10 Chapters Apart podcast. I'm your host, Steven, joined by my co-host, Jason. As always, Jason, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Steven. How are you doing?
I am doing all right, continuing to live through the coronavirus environment. Hair is getting long, and having to do things with that is interesting. But yeah, it is now the 6th week of Oregon's stay-at-home order because of the coronavirus. And obviously, there have been a lot of changes in our personal lives as well as our faith lives. What kind of changes have been going on for you, Jason?
I mean, they're the obvious sort of just staying at home things. I think sort of this view is what we see mostly of each other, just sort of like the white room, which honestly really kind of reflects like what it is in the world right now. It feels kind of blank to me almost. I miss like all the interactions that we used to have with people and going out doing things, going to church physically in a room with everyone. But it is what it is. What about you?
Yeah, definitely. It's so hard to not see anyone. All right, I see my roommate most part, and otherwise, like all the people that I know and would love to hang out with on the weekends or after work or anything like that, can't do any of it. And so I'm just alone for a good portion of the time. But I guess that's just what we got to do to keep things safe. And definitely, yeah, not being able to go to church and be there with everyone and worship together has been hard because like that's something I've been so used to doing. Um, do you think that it has become harder for the church to function because of coronavirus, or do you think it's been harder for church goers to keep up with their faith in this time? Do you find it hard yourself?
I do find it kind of hard, honestly, because I think that so much of what we do revolves around people, serving people, like loving on people, being loved by people. Um, I mean, if you think of the three greatest commandments in the Bible, it's like love God, love others. So that one, number two, that revolves around people. Number three is spread the word, evangelize, and that's also about people too. So it almost feels like, um, in a sense, I've almost been robbed of the ability to easily carry out commands two and three from God. So I personally have felt that kind of difficulty in my faith through this time.
But yeah, it's definitely been like an eye-opening moment, I think, um, because it's kind of revealed areas where I would have thought my faith was really strong, but maybe my faith was just reliant on other people. Or I love hanging out with the Epic community down at OSU, and I don't know. It kind of shows that without all of that community interaction, maybe my faith isn't as strong as I think it is. Or like I like to say, oh yeah, you can see the results of my faith through these actions, through this kind of event that we're putting on. But then when it comes down to like the quiet time, kind of like time that you should be having, I should be having with my Bible, with God, just spending quality time with God, I realize I don't have enough of that in my life, I think. And I think definitely with this whole shutdown and everyone not being able to go anywhere, it's definitely revealed to me that I need to be focusing more on that like relationship with God aspect of my faith rather than just the relationship with others.
Yeah, it's really hard because I feel like it's almost impossible to see fruit during this time. Like we, as Christians, we want to serve, and sort of the feedback that we get from that is watching other people grow or whatever the fruits of our labor are. But even when we're trying to pour into people, even like we still do our Bible studies over Zoom, we still have our large group college gatherings, we still have church. But it's so hard to see the fruit, and I think we can be really easily discouraged by the things that we previously had when we could see them before, and we can't see them now.
Do you feel like this time is making it making it harder for people to continue in the faith?
I have thought about this. I think one of the most interesting effects of coronavirus on the faith is that it's impossible to be stagnant now. I think before there there were people who, weren't super interested in their faith, but who are still coming to events, coming to church, doing all that because like they were part of the community and it was the thing to do. Um, but now that coronavirus has come and it's not like you can't just like, drag your friend to Bible study, you can't drag your friend to church. I think it's had a very polarizing effect. And I have noticed that the people who were, I think, pretty strong in their faith before, they're actually leaning into God more. I know people who, before the lockdown started, they were in their Bibles, I don't know, pretty frequently talking to people. And now those people are in their Bibles like every day. But there are also the people, like I mentioned earlier, who may have been stagnant and now they're starting to fall away. But I think that it's really interesting that coronavirus has kind of removed that middle ground from before, like just standing right on the fence and not going either way.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that. Like, to be honest, before this whole like shutdown and everything happened, when I was um, still taking classes as normal, I found it very hard to touch my Bible like daily,
Mhm.
pick it up, read it, pray regularly, because it always felt like, oh, there's something going on. There's something, I guess, a better use of my time. Like I could be like ministering to this group of people. I could serving in this way. I could be working on my homework or doing something else. But it's very hard to just like open my Bible and actually read. And I think now with not being able to do all of that like outside stuff, it has given me more time, and I have been trying to dive into the word more, still getting better at it. But I think it begs the question, like you were saying, that it kind of removes the middle ground of people. And I think that's really interesting what you say. Do you think that, um, I don't know, like, what do you think about the having like that middle ground of people? Like, is that okay for us in the church, in faith, to be okay with people just kind of in the middle, not one way or the other?
I think that's such a hard question to address because in the seven letters to the seven churches in Revelation, I can't remember which church was the lukewarm. I think it was the last letter. But basically, it's John dictating Jesus's words to these churches, and Jesus says like basically like you're lukewarm, and I'm going to spit you out of my mouth because you're neither hot or cold. And and so by that standard, it's like if they're sort of in that middle ground on the day of judgment, I think Jesus is going to say, I didn't know you. But the hard part of that is like when I look at my own life, I feel like right now I feel like pretty strong in my faith. But for the first 18 or so years of my life, and I got saved at the age of 6. So we'll say like the first 12 years of my spiritual life, I was that stagnant person. And God was still able to work on me. So it's really hard to take a hard stance on that. But I think that we do want those people because God can use those people, and it's not really up to us to determine. But I'm curious to know from you, like, um, is that kind of person someone that you would choose to invest your time in? Like, what would your stance on that be?
No, I think it is really similar to you in that I feel like it's so hard to tell because on one side you have like Jesus says to the disciples, like if you go out into the different towns and you're not welcomed in there, then you should just like shake the dust off your sandals and go on to the next one, right? It's a very like you can choose to follow me, but if you don't choose to do so, I'm not gonna like force you to. In fact, Jesus like throughout his ministry, it almost seemed like he made it harder for people to try to follow him. It wasn't like, oh yeah, no, we've got all this like free food or like community or like it's going to be really happy and like a fun time together. It was kind of like, oh, I really want to follow you, Jesus. Oh yeah, well, why don't you try doing this first? And then like, oh Jesus, I really want to follow you, but I need to go and wait to bury my father, right? Jesus like, sorry, the dead will bury themselves. You can follow me if you want. It's like
Yeah.
what? Like it seems like Jesus is sort of just saying, giving them the ultimatum, right? Like either you give your whole heart to me, or fine, like go do whatever else you want. But I require the whole heart, and so it's like a really hard question because I think especially like growing up in a Christian household, I also maybe have a sense, or I tend to focus more on like justice, right and wrong type of topics rather than grace. I think that like, oh, if you're doing this, or if you're in this position, you have to make a choice. You either choose what's right or wrong, and it's hard for me, for especially for other Christians, when they've done something that I don't consider right. It's a little bit harder for me to give them grace in those situations, I think. But like going back to your question, I think, yeah, it really depends. And I think as long as we're trying to win people over for Christ, God will see that and give us the reward for what we are doing. And if we are like trying to get people to know Christ, whether it's like through working on one person for a really, really long time and continuing to pray for them, or if it's saying, all right, this maybe this person has their heart hardened toward God and toward the Word, and I'm going to move on and try to share the gospel with those who have their hearts open. Um, I think either way, you can still be doing the work of the gospel. You can still be spreading the gospel to people. So, yeah, it's like I guess it really depends on who you're trying to share the gospel to.
Yeah, I see that. And it's hard to know how to thread that needle with like how much should I be like Jesus, because I think the conditions of Jesus's life were very different from ours, culturally. But I also think of, you know, when Jesus started his ministry, I think most people think he was about 30 years old. He knew he only had like basically 3 years to accomplish everything that he needed to accomplish, before he would eventually be martyred. And um, it it's hard for us, I think. Um, we don't know how long we're going to live, but I think most of us assume that we'll have 70, 80, 90 years to spread this gospel. And it's hard to know, like, do I want to take Jesus's approach and say, if you have ears to hear, then, come on, let's do this. Or should we be more patient, be more graceful with those people, even though it's really hard to see progress, hard to see fruit. And eventually it could, turn out to be a completely fruitless endeavor in the end if their heart just wasn't there for God anyways.
Yeah, but perhaps, I mean, definitely people take a while, especially if it's something completely new to them. If the gospel, if they just never heard it before, never heard about Jesus, or never really understood it. I'm sure it'd be hard to find someone in like America, or in many countries across the world, that have not at least heard about the word Christianity, or heard about Jesus, or heard about Christians in that way. But I'm sure a lot of people don't actually know fully what that means. Maybe they've seen it on TV. Maybe they've seen a lot of people who claim to be Christian, and but don't show it in their actions, which gives them a hard view of Christianity. And I think for those people, it will take a longer time to kind of warm up to the idea, or to understand what it is that truly defines being Christian. Not like all of the acts, not all of the things that you're supposed to do, but it's really about the grace and the forgiveness that God brings, and how much He wants your life. He wants everything that you have. Like, He wants you to give your life to Him. And so I think it's going to be hard for those kind of people to really just, you can't just like share the gospel with them once and expect them to come to salvation, right? It's going to take time, and you're going to have to work on them.
Yeah.
But like going back to, I guess, for the Christians that are right now already saved, and are going to church, do you think that there's kind of a dangerous middle ground where you're not like fully committed? Or I guess the question is, would you rather have someone who is lukewarm in their faith, or someone who's just not at church at all, or not in the faith at all, not like believing at all?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question also. I don't know if you remember, but so two summers ago, you were a sophomore, I was a freshman. Josh Chen spoke at our retreat, And he talked to us about being lukewarm, and he said, I don't know about this whole Christianity thing. And I think it was his sister who said, okay, then be cold. And he did. He told us that he had a lot of less than savory experiences in college, and then he eventually found his way back to Christ, and he's a minister now or speaker. I don't know what he would call himself, but he's doing his best to, advance the kingdom of Christ. And he went from being lukewarm to being cold, and that was sort of a step in his journey to really experiencing Christ fully. So that would be an example of where it's like, okay, I would prefer someone cold. um, and it also is interesting, in the sermon that we listened to today. Our pastor talked about how it's in those valleys, like the valley of the shadow of death, where God really makes himself known to you, makes himself personal. And so in that sense also, you would want to see maybe that person does need to go cold for a while in order to see what it's like without God, and then to realize, oh, what I had before was better. But I think there's an argument to be made the other way. I'll use myself again. I was lukewarm, and just the fact that I was able to stay in the faith just enough to know that I needed to like join a student ministry in college where my faith could really take off. Like that's another way where we see good from it. So I don't know. There are pros and cons both ways. But if it was me advising to a person, I think I would have a hard time telling them to be cold instead of lukewarm.
Yeah.
I think I would rather take the approach of like patience and grace and like, hey, let's
Move
work
the
on this.
lukewarm and warm it up and make it boil, right?
Yeah,
Rather
like
than
I don't
let it
want to.
go cold.
I don't want to dump it out and try to
Right, right.
start with something new. Let's. But yeah, I don't know. How do you side on that issue?
Yeah. No, like actually probably one of my closest friends throughout all of middle school, high school, I went to church with. Um, I would say that during his like middle school and high school, he was pretty lukewarm about the gospel and just um, our church was a very small Chinese church, and so there wasn't really like a solid youth group. There wasn't really a solid. It was basically maybe the total of the high school and middle school group in our church was not more than 10. So we didn't grow up in an environment where there were a lot of people our age who were also into God. And I think that caused him to be fairly lukewarm. It's just like, oh yeah, come to church because parents are coming to church. And then everything else is more important. School is more important. Gotta do other things. But after he went to college and decided to join a student ministry at the college that he's at, honestly, his life changed, and he like fell in love with God, and he loves serving and like diving deep into the Word. And I didn't expect it, but one day in sophomore year, 2 years ago, he just messaged me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to go through the Book of John together?" I was like, "What? That's crazy!" Because this is a guy that like I didn't expect growing up to even ask me to read the Bible together, and it was on his initiative, right? So I think that's just one example of a story where, yeah, someone who was lukewarm and then kind of saw a different side of Christianity, saw a different side of Christians, a loving and caring and welcoming side that helped him to really see God's love. And so, yeah, I think it would be hard for me to say, yeah, if you're lukewarm about the Bible, you'd rather be cold. I definitely would try to encourage them to kind of see God in a different way, but it's very hard.
I think
Yeah,
it illustrates an important point though, because we have so many stories of like this person went this way and they found God, this person went this way and they found God. And like the fact is like there's no formula to get to God. It's like I'm lukewarm right now. Okay, I'm gonna go cold and then God will find me and then I'll have God. It's like it doesn't really work like that. It's like God is going to find you where you're at, and it's going to be his hand that guides you to get where he needs you to go, where he can be most effective in reaching you. Um, but I want to go back to something from earlier, just because I'm curious. We were talking about like more the personal maintenance side of our spiritual lives, reading the Bible and praying. I'm curious for you if when you do have those quiet times of reading and prayer, does it feel different now than it did before coronavirus?
Mm, in what way? What are you trying to get at? I'm wondering.
Um,
Does it feel
I've
different?
noticed a change. I've noticed a change in myself, I feel, and it's hard to really pinpoint the source of it, but I think it has to do with the fact that we're out of community now. Maybe this is a personal failing on my part from before, but I felt like I was in the Word very frequently, and it was helping me in my interactions with other people. And I was able to took what I read and apply it in service. And now that I don't have as many opportunities to serve, and really no opportunities to serve like in person, I feel like it almost feels like that aspect of my Bible reading is just like no longer valid. So I've had to do a lot of thinking and spiritual digging to examine like why exactly am I reading the Bible, and what am I how am I using this to hear from God, to talk to God, to know God better, if this other really crucial part of my spiritual life has been taken away.
Yeah, it does make it harder when I'm reading the Bible and it's talking about all the applications on how to love others and how to treat others and do things for the church. It makes it harder because I can't go out and do those things. And I've definitely been reading the Bible more so to try to learn about God. I don't know if I would necessarily say the way that I pray and the way that my Bible reading has changed too much. It's kind of always been just going in, see what I can get from the passage, see what I can learn about God from the passage, and then um, praying, asking God to help me in whatever I have coming up. So yeah, I don't know if I would say that it's changed the way I've been reading the Bible too much.
hmm I've noticed for myself, like when I read, I think reading should always be a way for us to know God and to sort of unlock His personality and His characteristics. But I always have this looming thought now, even if it's not like in my head at the time, but just the fact that when I read the Bible, I won't be able to use it for a long time until the quarantine stuff is over. So it's really really been boiled down when I read the Bible now to just purely knowing God, uh, and it's been a weird change for me. And the admitting that is kind of hard because I think it reveals a weakness that I had in reading the Bible before, that um, I guess I thought of it more as a weapon to use for Christ instead of um, knowing Christ Himself. And now it's no longer a weapon. It's been stripped down to just purely this relationship. And I think it's good for me to know that now. You talked about how coronavirus sort of has been exposing our weaknesses, and that's definitely one of the weaknesses that I found in myself.
Yeah, I think maybe not necessarily with Bible reading, but as like my prayer life has been a bit different. I think I've just been looking for more rest or trying to get to know God better, rather than praying for this, for that, for whatever's going to happen tomorrow, for all the things that I can request for. I think I've been trying to just pray and ask God for Him to reveal Himself to me, for Him to so that I would know who He is and better understand Him and better understand His will for me. Um, so, as far as my relationship with God, I feel like that is one thing that has changed in the prayer life.
hmm Yeah, that makes sense. I think I've started praying more, which is, I think, cool for me. It's always good to pray more. Um, I've been going on bike rides just to like get fresh air, and while I'm out, I'll just be talking to God the whole time, just praying for other people, praying for God to reveal Himself, praying for Him to work through this time that we're experiencing right now. Um, and I'd like to know what you think. Like, how do you think that the church will be changed when we finally do come out of this time? Just the church as a whole.
Uh, well, I mean, besides for the physical changes, it's like I don't know if people are gonna hug anymore or like handshakes? Are people going to continue with the 6 feet apart even when they're in church, just as like a caution, because it's so scary, this entire virus thing? But um, I think the people that have continued in God throughout this um, will be like overjoyed at coming back to church, and I think I definitely will too. Like the Sunday that we come back and have our first church service again, but yeah, it's gonna be partying. We're gonna be praising and just dancing, and it's gonna be so much fun. It's gonna be so great to see everyone together. Um, and I feel like we're gonna not be too fearful because we're just gonna be so happy to be back again. Um, and I would hope that the people who maybe this time has been a bit more of a struggle for them, that this time uh, like has led them to maybe be distracted more. I hope that those people, when we come back, will really enjoy coming back as well, and will also want to be at church because they've missed the interaction. So both like both the strong Christians missing the church interaction, helping others, but also the Christians that are more lukewarm or non-Christians who are looking for that interaction will be drawn to church because of that, because it's like a place where they can see people and be with people. So, I mean, hopefully it'll be good when church opens back up. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be, dude, when we finally come back, it's gonna be so nuts. But I think you make a really good point about the people who this time has been a little bit harder for spiritually, because when we finally come back, everyone who's been diligent to abide in Christ during this time is just going to be so joyful, and everyone's going to be so happy to see each other. And for those who weren't, I really hope that when they finally come back, they're going to realize what they've been missing during this time, and they're going to understand that like that is something that they want for their life, like to become their lifestyle, really.
And it's definitely funny that the cliche is like, you never know a good time until it's not there, right? You don't know how valuable something is until it's not there. And it's almost like God has taken this away from us. He's saying like, all right, you guys made church into a routine. You made it into oh yeah, it's something I have to do every week, and then afterwards I'm gonna hit the gym or go study or something. But I just gotta get my church in, you know. I have all these obligations, these jobs to do. I'm worship leader, or I'm on the prayer team, or things like that. And we've turned it into like a monotonous cycle, and not really been joyful and like excited to do it when. And then this comes along, and now we can't do it, and we miss it, and we're like, wow, I was so blessed to have this position. I was so blessed to be able to bless others, to be able to share God's love in this way through my works and like through the talents that God has given me, whether it be playing instruments, whether it be teaching, whether it be talking with people and encouraging others. And now all of this is taken away, and I miss it so much. I think it's really is God showing us like, these things are valuable, like treasure them while you have it. And now that you don't have it, you see how valuable it is. And so when all of this passes over and we come back to church, I hope that we do value, and for myself too. I really hope that I can take this and value this, and whenever I get down and think, yeah, this is kind of, I have to go to church again, I have to go to practice again. Like, I hope that whenever I think about that, I think I can think back to this time and think, it was rough. It was rough not being able to go to worship practice. It was rough not being able to go to church and see everyone, and like still be grateful for those things.
It's crazy how much we take for granted,
Yeah.
and just so many things. It's unimaginable that those things would be taken away from us. Like the ability to have someone over to your house. It's just like I had no idea that God would be able to take that away. And yeah, it really makes you think like, how much else am I taking for granted? Man, I talk about this a lot, but I always think that Hillsong concert that we went to, I think it was last June, so coming up on a year ago, and the guy said like he was talking about people in third world countries, and they have so little, talking about how like how often do you thank God for your toilet? And that still runs through my mind today. And it's just those kinds of things that we've just always had that we don't think about. We don't thank God for them. We take them for granted. And then, God takes it away. God takes away my ability to interact with people in person. And then, that gets stripped away. And what do I have left? And I know that for myself, I've spent a lot of time thinking um, just about my faith, about the religion, about the relationship with God. And a lot of my thoughts have just been asking myself, hey, what's really important in everything that we're doing here? Because I think if you just pull a random Christian off the street and you say, hey, what are the important things to do in your faith? They'll say, oh, going to church, serving, reading your Bible, praying, sort of just the regular canned answers that most people are looking for. But even one of those four things that I said, going to church, that's been taken away. And it really begs these questions of like, okay, what's really at the heart of this that I really need to focus on completing?
Yeah, I think that also, do you think that there is a difference between Christians and non-Christians right now in the time of coronavirus? And what I'm trying to get at is that everything that we just mentioned, that we're going to be so overjoyed to go back in church, to be in community, and have all these things, right? Non-Christians don't have these things regularly, right? Like, they don't have the church community. Does this environment that we're in, does it help us to evangelize to non-Christians better? Because there's obviously, we should believe that the difference between what we have and what they have, that there is a void there, that there's something that they're longing to be filled, right? In this time of coronavirus, do we see a difference between Christians and non-Christians as far as like, oh, Christians, do we have more hope? Is there more joy? Is there more peace because we have God? And is that going to allow us to evangelize even better? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I think it should, but it's still just so hard. And when you ask what really is the difference between Christians and non-Christians during this time, hope is the first thing that I thought of, and that's also what you mentioned first. I know that for myself, like, this kind of sucks. I really wish that we could go back to the way things were. We've been talking this whole time about how much we both miss community. Um, but I have hope, and I know that God is working through this time. I know that, and yeah, and I have peace about the whole situation, knowing that it's going to last as long as God wants it to last. We're going to be fine as long as we abide in Him, and I'm not really worried. And even I don't really consider myself at risk, like health risks, but for any Christian who is concerned about getting the virus, even if the virus does claim their life, like, we know that we have life somewhere else, and so I think that hope is really really important. Um, but yeah, as far as evangelism goes, I think it's really hard because I think one of the ways in which I was most effective in my evangelism before this was just sort of in those incidental interactions. You just run into someone, an old friend, and maybe you had just gotten done with discipleship and they asked what you had done that day, so you tell them. Or you're with another friend from our college group and you run into that person together and you say, oh, have you met this person? I know this person from my college ministry. And in that way, through those sort of incidental interactions, it gives you an opening to then start introducing Jesus into your relationship. And then maybe you get them to come to our college gathering or something like that. But it feels really hard now because you don't really run into anyone anymore. Any interaction that you have, for the most part, is a planned interaction. You schedule it and then you do it. So yeah, it does make it hard. And for those people who don't have Jesus, I don't know if Jesus is the thing that they're looking for right now, which also makes it pretty hard.
Yeah, it's like and even if you have those unplanned interactions, like say you're walk into the grocery store and you run into someone, right? It still feels a little bit awkward too because you're trying to keep a distance. So you're just saying, "Oh, hi," and then you don't know whether you should talk with them or not because you're just trying to maintain distance, but you want to talk with them. I mean, that's some of the random interactions that I have been having.
Yeah, and the other thing about it is like if you do have those interactions, there's one thing on everyone's mind, and it's like, this is crazy. There's a pandemic going on. And so if you do talk about anything, it's probably going to be something along the lines of, hey, crazy times we're living in, huh? And it's really hard to take those conversations anywhere meaningful.
Yeah, especially since even bringing up the topic of religion has become so taboo in our society. It's so hard to get that in. When someone says, "Oh yeah, it's been really tough. How are you doing with the whole situation?" And you want to, like your spirit wants to talk about like, "Oh yeah, no, but I have hope because Jesus is my savior, and I don't have to worry about what happens on the earth." And I want to talk about all this stuff that you have. But you can't because it's just not socially appropriate or something. It's hard to bring up that topic.
Is that cultural? Is that like an American culture thing that we just don't want our beliefs shattered?
Uh,
I hear about
maybe
I
it
hear about
is.
evangelism in other countries where they can, just go talk to people or knock on someone's door, and that family would love to have a conversation with them, invite them in. I don't know if how universal that is, but
As far as like how much we talk, or like in the ways that we talk with people, or bringing up the topic of religion.
yeah, bringing up the topic of religion, I feel like people just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, well, I don't really know.
I think it can be a little bit divisive too. I actually had a conversation with one of my fellow math majors last term in one of the school buildings. I I I was reading my Bible actually in front of him, and then he came to the table and joined me, and he started doing his math homework or something. And it was hard for me to focus, so I put my Bible away and I started doing something else. I would read later. And he said, "Oh, like you put it away so soon. I thought you were gonna study or whatever." And I was like, it's like kind of distracting right now. I can't really focus on it." But it opened up the door. I just asked him straight up, like, "Hey, what do you think about religion? What do you think about like this whole Christianity thing?" And we actually had a really good conversation. I think it lasted probably at least 20 minutes, just sort of talking about our beliefs, what different people believe. And it was interesting because there was a guy at the table next to us. He had to go somewhere, but he got up and he came over to our table and he said, "Hey, I just want to say that I really appreciate that you were able to have a conversation about religion and not have it be an argument, and that you were actually like open to each other's ideas." And I think that's an unfortunate reality, is that when we want to bring up those religion topics, it's really hard to make it like a come with me thing. It's really easy for it to become like an us and them kind of thing.
Yeah,
You want to win
yeah,
them over to your side.
yeah. Like it very easily can turn into just an argument about different issues, and that's like, uh, I I don't like it when people come into talking about religion and all they want to do, there are these type of people. All they want to do is bring up the controversial topics. They want to bring up what Christians think about the LGBTQ community. They want to bring up about what Christians think about abortions, or like whether they support Trump or things like that. And it's so much better if you can go and just have the conversation where you're like talking about life, and talking about I don't know, what you believe, what they believe, and kind of wrestling through topics. And I think maybe this is not just a problem with talking about religion or Christianity, but it's just a problem talking about um, topics in general. I feel like more recently, people have become so defensive with their opinions, and it's very hard to talk with people without getting into an argument, right? People associate, "Oh, if you're critiquing my ideas, then you're critiquing me and you're attacking me." But really, it should be more about talking about issues and actually trying to find the truth. You know, nowadays, it's very hard to have a discussion about the truth because, oh yeah, your truth is different from my truth. We all grew up with different experiences and everything is relative, right? Well, for some part, I think things are relative. Like people do grow up with different experiences, right? But all of that should be brought together to trying to be able to figure out what is the truth, right? I think that's a huge portion of our life is just trying to figure out what is true, what is right, what should we be basing our morals and our ethics and our lifestyle around, and trying to find what the truth is. And I think nowadays it's so hard to talk about what is the truth, like whether this is right or wrong, and then come up with facts and support it with arguments, because people will just say, oh no, you're thinking different from me, you just have a different mindset. But I think like we've lost some of the ability to just try to come together and come to understanding together and support our own ideas without getting too defensive, without feeling like, oh yeah, this person is just thinking this way because they're a Christian, or this person's just thinking this way because they're a Republican or a Democrat, or things like that. It's made it so much harder to kind of work together in this country, and whether it's this time in just America or wherever it is.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also important that if you don't convert someone to your way of thinking, you didn't like lose a battle. I think we need to be okay with people having their own beliefs. And obviously we as Christians, we believe that, God made us. We believe that he sent his son Jesus to come and die for us on the cross, and that through belief in that, we gain access to this relationship with God directly, and we can go to heaven if we die. When we die, so long as we continue to abide in Jesus. And if other people don't believe that, that's sad for us. But I think that we need to let it be, and sort of just like let God do the work. If we can't get them to join us in that line of thinking, then I don't think it's not our place to do the work of converting them. I think it's our job to just share the gospel and let God speak through it. And sorry, I didn't finish my point from earlier. It's like we as Christians, we believe so firmly in this gospel message. And I think any strong Christian is not going to change their way of thinking because we so firmly believe that this is true. And I think that same thing is true of a lot of other people and what they believe, is that we come to them with this message that we have dedicated our whole lives to. But maybe that there's that way with something else, and we won't be able to change their way of thinking either.
When talking with people that are going through some kind of trial or struggle, and now more than ever, I'm sure we have these kind of conversations with people, there's the side of thinking that it's inappropriate to bring up Christ or bring up religion. And some people would even say, oh, if you use that trial or that troubled time that they're going through and bring up religion, it's almost like exploiting the situation in order to get them to follow you, or to, I don't know. But there's the other side that I feel like wants to bring that up and say, oh yeah, if I see you're going through some troubling time or hardship, I want to show you the light. I want to show you who can help and who is able to empathize with you and who is able to understand with you. So that's why I really want to bring up God and Jesus and show you about that. So where do you think the balance lies there in talking about this? Maybe for you personally, do you try not to specifically bring up God in those situations, or try to ease it in a little bit more gently if they're going through a tough time? Maybe just talk about, maybe be more comforting in them? Or do you want to use this time to share with them the joy that you have?
If I ever get that opportunity, just like an easy way to share the gospel, like 100%, I'm going to take it. I think both of us are keeping an eye out for those opportunities, and we sort of have this like internal evangelism radar that's like always sort of intermittently going, and like, okay, where can I just talk about Jesus to this person? But the thing that makes it really hard is that, since we were talking about the fact that pretty much all of our interactions are intentional now. It's like I really don't get those interactions with my non-Christian friends as much anymore. Maybe it's just like, sending a video game meme to each other, just texting, or um, but those meaningful interactions, I feel like I don't get those as much anymore. But um, yeah, I think in those few and far between times when I am able to talk to my non-believing friends, I think I'm pretty forward with like the Christian activities that I do. Like I'll tell them, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go to Bible study soon," or, um, "Oh yeah, Epic's doing stuff over Zoom now." Um, I won't. I usually won't try to like openly evangelize to them or like ask them what they think about religion. But if they ever say, man, how are you like keeping yourself afloat during this time? That's like a great opportunity where I would tell them what I believe, where my hope lies. But ultimately, I think it's just waiting for God to give us those opportunities.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that as you're sharing the gospel with someone, you're not sharing because well you are sharing because you want to change them, but you're not sharing because you want them to change in a particular. You're sharing because you have experienced this joy and this kind of difference in your life, and you want to share that with someone else, and you want their life to become better. It's not oh, I just want to convert you to my religion, because I think a lot of non-believers would think that. It's like when you share the gospel with them, say, oh, you're just trying to convert me. It's like, no, like I actually, my life has been changed. We have this great difference in our life, the joy, hope, peace that I feel like others don't have, and I just want to share with others. And so as we share the gospel, I think it's important to keep that kind of mindset, or at least share with the person that we're talking to, that it isn't just trying to convert you to my religion. It's like much more than that.
Yeah, it's such a personal thing, and I think if we ever reduce it to just like a numbers game, or I'm going to convert you so I can put another tick on my whiteboard in my room, it's like that just completely misses the whole point of why we do it. And I know that, yeah, just the difficulty in evangelizing now has been something that's been pretty hard for me to deal with. But Ben Peterson, who actually was on with us last week, he gave me some really great encouragement. And I was like, um, if God isn't putting opportunities in front of you, He's not giving those things to you. Maybe that means like it's okay to not be super wrapped up in, oh, I can't evangelize right now. And maybe God just wants us to focus on that relationship with Him. He brought up Paul, who after his conversion spent like 7, 8, 9, 10 years back in Tarsus, just getting to know God more personally through the lens of the Christian faith. And when we finally see him again after his conversion, it's Barnabas going and finding him to help him serve the church in Antioch. But most scholars think that that's, like I said, like basically a 10-year gap where Paul was just on his own, refilling, getting to know God. And I think that that's what this time right now could be really valuable for.
Yeah, definitely. When you're not pouring out, you should be like refilling yourself with God, so that way you have the energy, you have the knowledge, you have the power, like God's Holy Spirit power, to fill you in order to go out when you do have those opportunities. We're getting a bit close to the end. I wanted to bring up just one last question, because we were talking about the topic of evangelism, and it's kind of a big question, but I'll just bring it up because I thought of it. What do you think about the kind of more like the open evangelism kind of style, where you just evangelize by walking up to people, having a conversation with them. You've never talked to them before, and just asking them what they believe, and then sharing the gospel with them like that, rather than come join my community, come into my community, get to know everyone first, experience a love like this, and then come to learn about God. Do you think there's value in also just, you are walking down the street, see someone, or you're walking around your neighborhood and say, hi, how's it going? And then have a conversation with them. Do you think that works anymore?
Do I think it works anymore?
Or is it effective? Like, is it something that if we just had more courage, that we would be out and doing that more? Or is it like something that maybe just like turns people off nowadays? Nowadays, it's not something that people want, or they, yeah. Is it just something that you don't think would be effective, or are there still people that you think God can can come to know God through those kind of interactions, just like going up to a random person on the street?
Yeah, that's such a hard thing because earlier we were talking like, oh, how much should I be trying to model my life after Jesus? Should it be exactly? And we were looking at that in the context of sort of like the grace and truth um, sort of discussion, but also when we look at the way that Jesus evangelized is there was both the personal evangelism of talking to people, healing, having those direct interactions, but we know that he preached to crowds a lot. And yeah, I'm guessing he didn't. I mean, he's God, so he like knows those people, but I'm guessing he hadn't, built up a relationship through like lots of conversations and spending time with the vast majority of those people. But we see it effective there. So like, it's just such a hard thing. This is sort of a cop out answer, but the way that I think of a lot of these things, I think that there are a lot of things that we can do in our faith that would be like good Christian things to do. I could hop online and give Grant Avenue Baptist Church $100 right now. I could go to Fred Meyer 2 blocks away and look for people to have conversations with about faith. Um, you know, but I always ask myself, do I feel called right now? And I think I've heard of other people who normally wouldn't adopt that sort of street evangelism style, who have felt the call of God to just go talk to a stranger, and that interaction turned out for the best, and that person was saved later on, or they started going to church. So that's really what I would leave it down to is if I felt this sort of inexplicable call to go talk to a person, if I saw them, sitting at a table in the MU or anything like that. But I am going to take the more pragmatic side and say that I would rather, for the most part, be pouring into the people that I have relationships with, because if they do choose to give their life to Christ, then I'm also in a good position to disciple them and sort of have it be like a long-term investment thing, which I feel like I don't see as much from the street evangelism side.
Yeah. I think, I mean, there are some people who don't like street preachers or street evangelism. And for me personally, I say if that's what they are doing to further the gospel, if that's how they think their mindset is, they can reach the most amount of people, and there is probably someone there that is willing and open to hearing the gospel, then yeah, like go for it, man. And I think yeah, again, both options are viable. I think they're both useful. And yeah, I just kind of wonder whether it is because Christians have become too fearful of doing something like that, too scared of what people will think of you. That kind of mentality of going out there and trying to share the gospel in that way is very challenging. It takes a lot of like fortifying your own soul, your own spirit, in order to not get crushed by denial over and over again, and people thinking of you weirdly. So I have a lot of respect for people that do that, and I wonder if the Christian church has become, if that doesn't happen because people are a little bit too fearful, and if that's something that should be stopping us from doing that.
Yeah, that's a good thought, because I think there are a lot of things. I think, it's okay if we don't evangelize on the street, but if you're not evangelizing on the street because you're fearful of what will happen, or fearful, um, not sure that God will take care of you during that, then I think that really calls into question, oh, should I be doing this? Should I be leaning into God? Should I rely on Him to give me that boldness to go do that? And that's sort of what's helped me, is like, uh, choosing my actions based on whether or not I feel God's called to do it. Because I think if God calls you, He will also fill you with the boldness to go do that. Um, and yeah, it's just such a hard question, because it can be so effective. You can reach so many people. Um, yeah, maybe we just need the boldness to do it, and to go out, prepare our hearts, steel ourselves against what Satan wants to do to knock us down, and just do what we can to further God's kingdom.
Yeah. Well, we have had some pretty great discussions today about the church and coronavirus, and also more on evangelism and what to do during this time. Once again, this is the 10 Chapters Apart podcast. I'm Steven, this is Jason, and we are just young Christians trying to figure out what it is that God wants us to do in our lives these days, and how do we grow and spread God's word to people. If you have some kind of perspective or opinion on the things that we said today, maybe you don't think things are right, maybe you think we're completely wrong, please feel free to leave it in the comments. And also, we try to make sure that everything that we say is biblically founded. We want to make sure that we're not just spewing off things just because we think of it. We are keeping in the word and trying to make sure that our actions and the things that we say on here reflect that as well. So hopefully, if there is something that we've said that is wrong, that you think is counterintuitive to the word, please feel free to let us know. If you have any business inquiries or want a guest on the podcast, there's a link to a form you can fill out in the description, and we'll see what we can do. And yeah, but other than that, anything else you want to say, Jason?
I think that's it.
All right, sweet. We will see you again next week, Mondays at noon. This is the 10 Chapters Apart podcast.